a huge group feels their needs are met, let's say right now, by Kamala, and a huge group feels their needs are met by Trump. So when one person wins, there's going to be a group that are going to feel underprivileged. Like the privileges they have are either lost or they're afraid they're going to be lost, or the people whose privileges are here that get maintained feel like a sense of security, regardless of the side. And that's what I think is so fascinating about America is because we have a democracy and because we vote and because that vote changes every 4 years, we're constantly going through a rebirth of a huge population of our relatives that we share land with who are completely different from us and against things we believe in, winning. Like that's just the inevitability of living in a country that practices actual freedom. Hey, everybody, I am joined with my lovely team because we're talking about something that I just don't hear being talked about anywhere. And I wanted to offer a bit of a counter vortex to the stress that's happening for a lot of Americans, but even people abroad around the upcoming 2024 elections. And so, what I'm offering, and my team is courageous enough to play with me around, is how we're going to be okay regardless of who is president. And this is fascinating for me because I've lived through many elections and each one is very similar and they all say the same thing. We've never seen one like this before. This is going to be a make or break. We're going to lose everything if this person gets it. We're going to gain everything if this person gets it. And life pretty much goes on either way when someone gets elected. So I get fascinated by my personal somatic theory around finding safety in yourself and how that correlates to how we are politically and how we are with government systems and even larger systems outside of us. If we're actually looking toward this one person who doesn't even have all the decisions, if you really look into how it works, for the safety and how quick we give it to them in our minds and bodies rather than what we can do and what our agency is in these 4 to 8 years we have when someone gets elected. So, with that being said, let's start by first saying where we've come from, because all four of us have a history of being very activated from politics before we understood this work and we really learned how to ground into our body and find that safety within. I just feel like going to you first, Camille, just to see where this lands in you around the idea now of, oh, I'll be safe either way versus where you've been in the past. So listeners get a sense of where you come from. You just weren't born with this, oh, I'm okay no matter who's president.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll give a bit of context. So let's say I was really involved or really engaged with the both the 2008 and 2012 elections. For context, that was when Barack Obama was running. So very invested in that for a couple of different reasons. But the 2016 election was very different for me. Um, my first child was born in December of 2015. And coming into the new year, particularly as I began to go back into work around April or March of that year, I started noticing I was having these really, really massive emotional displays, which was just very not like me. Um, and throughout the year, it finally came to my awareness that I was experiencing a bit of guilt for choosing to bring a Black child into this world. And so there was some work for me to do around that. But in the midst of all this was the 2016 election. And I found myself, particularly with that election, obsessively checking the statistics every day, sometimes in fact, many days, multiple times a day, to see that Hillary was going to win. And at the end of that election, two things came to my awareness. One, I never wanted to do that again because I was exhausted. I mean, I was depleted day after day watching these tickers, the statistical analysis of who was going to win, and then holding my breath to see that Hillary was going to win, and if she didn't, I was just like, I can't do this again. But two, I could also recognize that part of what I was doing, part of why that election was so different for me, was because of the guilt I had about bringing my child into this world. And that, no, I can't get rid of racism and the fact that, yes, you'll probably be racially profiled at some point in your life, maybe worse. But at the very least, if I could just guarantee that Trump doesn't win, maybe you're not completely fucked. And that was interesting to witness retrospectively.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you more about even how the years of Trump affected you? Because what I find fascinating about this story, and but I'm going to go to everyone else in a moment. What I find fascinating about everyone I know who was really, really heightened that year. I remember that very clear. I remember especially that feeling right leading up to the actual results of this literally do or die feeling people were holding. And then everyone I know, and I'm just speaking for who I know, lived a pretty glorious 4 years. Obviously the pandemic was a nightmare for different reasons, but when it comes to who was presiding over the country, it didn't actually directly affect the individuals the way they imagined it was going to. And I haven't heard any follow-up about that. And so I find that very interesting. So one of my things I want to go into today is us four really diving into, well, what were those years like? Because we projected what they were going to be like. That's fine. What were they actually like? So I'm just throwing it out there for the listeners. And of course, I find it comical that Marika's call dropped for a second because she's back. It's been two HLN team episodes about very charged things. And one was a birthday, and I forget what the other reason was. But she had two really good reasons for not being here. But we started getting some requests. People are like, "Where's Marika? Where's Marika? Where did she go?" So Marika's here, and with that, I'm going to turn to you. And the first question is, would your former self imagine you be sitting here talking talking about this with us?
No, I don't think so. Um, but I mean, I'm gonna say my former self was really super binary, right? About everything at that time because it did feel like all these things were on the line and we were gonna lose XYZ and did. There were some things that I feel like that did happen that I was not super excited about. But overall, it's like I I was still alive. I was still, my life went on pretty much the same way it normally probably would have. I just had less of an eye on media and stuff because I was so burnt out from trying to convince people what the right way is to think on Facebook, which is literally the most like, why? I think I've convinced zero people, but I probably wrote like 1,000 posts. You know what I mean? And the only people I convinced are other people who were like, yeah, we're right. Cool.
Is that convincing?
I know, I mean, I don't, it didn't even feel like it just wasn't, effective in like the way that I thought. I really thought that you could use social media in this way. I
Yeah.
still use social media and to let people know what's important to me or like something that I feel is that folks need to know about, but it isn't my full-time job
Hmm.
anymore. It was
Yeah.
very much my full-time job. I felt like it was everybody's full-time job. This is what we were doing was
Absolutely.
reacting. And once I got out of the reacting sort of reflexive reacting game, it was so clear, what was really happening, all these trauma responses bouncing off of each other, and all these people being like putting each other in boxes and
Hmm.
labels and do. I mean, you saying that, life just sort of went on and nothing really changed for you. My first thing is that because of privilege?
Hmm.
That's my first reaction because there were people I know who were very affected by how the pandemic
Hmm.
was um, rolled out. And there were people who were affected, I know, by Roe v. Wade or, those types of things. And they're still, hopefully, they're still around. We're still kicking. We're still at this next junction of like voting again, which I'm always surprised by how surprised I am that we have to keep doing this. I'm really glad that I live in a country where I can vote on things, and I also question it all the time, whether it's doing anything, and I still vote. But
Well, I'm curious. Two things are coming up as you're speaking, then we're going to go to Evan. I'm hearing expected and actual threat, which is something I teach on a lot. And I think we can play with that throughout this whole conversation because you and Camille both said something similar of like leading up, it was a full-time job. My body was bracing, I was burnt out. Then this kind of surrender, which I think is this is the part that I'm saying goes unspoken, is we're talking about how stressed out we were imagining what was going to happen. Then it happened and everyone was mostly fine. And when you say, about privilege, I'm first of all, I'm curious what you mean because Which privilege of mine are you bringing up, first of all?
Oh, I just sort of like when someone's like, I was completely unaffected by this huge thing, by this thing that happened that, maybe you weren't a woman and you didn't need to get an abortion. Maybe you
Totally, totally.
are because you're, because you, whatever it is that you are, I'm,
Whatever I am.
I'm like, whatever, I can't
That's the
quite, you're
clip that will
like
be pulled
beyond
out and used
pronouns to
against
me.
used
So
against Marie.
like
No,
whatever
I agree.
you
I
might,
agree.
yeah. Yeah, you're kind of beyond that. You're like, it's
You
like
told me I
how
came
I
from an
said you don't
egg.
have.
You
No, I
said I
always
came
told
from
him,
an egg.
yeah, he doesn't seem like he came from parents. It seems like he was born out of like a space egg. So it's also crazy to me that you vote. You know what I mean? I
Oh
mean,
my
I hope you
gosh.
do.
I vote. I do vote.
I
Um,
remember actually we were texting each other when it
mhm.
was it Trump Biden? God, it's been long. Trump Biden.
Yeah.
The last time I was on vacation.
Yeah.
And we, yeah, in the morning, you were the one who was telling me like who'd won and that type of thing. It's like, oh. But
Yeah.
now basically I just make sure I'm on vacation the week after an election. Like it's the perfect thing to do.
Well, the reason why I brought the privileged part because I think that's what's so fascinating about life in general, but America is each person who's running, each group, whatever it is, right? And there's so many groups we don't even talk about because we're so obsessed with the Democrats and the Republicans. There's so many amazing people that don't even make the light of day, and that is more frustrating to me than anything else. But I think everyone's going to have a different representation. Like one person's going to feel their needs are met. Like a huge group feels their needs are met, let's say right now by Kamala, and a huge group feels their needs are met by Trump. So when one person wins, there's going to be a group that are going to feel underprivileged. Like the privileges they have are either lost or they're afraid they're going to be lost, or the people whose privileges are here that get maintained feel like a sense of security, regardless of the side. And that's what I think is so fascinating about America is because we have a democracy and because we vote and because that vote changes every 4 years, we're constantly going through a rebirth of a huge population of our relatives that we share land with who are completely different from us and against things we believe in winning. Like that's just the inevitability of living in a country that practices actual freedom, where everybody gets a chance to run things. And so I guess I get interested, and we'll go into this a little more because I want to hear from Evan, but I get interested in, when one person says, I wasn't affected by Biden, and let's say a Republican might be like, I was. You can't even fathom that because it's not your side. And the same thing with the pandemic. Like, I can say I wasn't affected in those years. And what I mean when I say that is I wasn't affected politically by Trump running. It was like those 4 years politically were no different than the 4 years before for me in terms of policies. And yes, some policies that affect me differently from other people and other bodies for sure. But I just think it's interesting of how do we're not given a spiritual practice or a somatic practice of how do we pendulate between these waves of these different sides literally taking over and changing policies that feel super safe for half the country and feel really dangerous for the other half. That's fascinating to me. So we'll get to that in a minute. But Evan, what was it as you're hearing this? What do you want to add to how you've maybe how you currently view politics and elections in particular is what we're talking about compared to maybe how you viewed them before, or if nothing's changed?
Yeah, totally. I think that also like 2016 was a really huge one for me, where it really shifted everything about the way I do or don't identify, I think is really where it's coming to. I think I had so much stress going up to it, and I finally reached a point where like I had felt like I had done everything I could possibly have. I was like, trying to get groups of people together, and I was gonna like rent, I was gonna like rent a big van and like get everybody in to go to the polls, and I was like running around trying to get everybody to vote. Um, and then as for my political opinions at the time, first of all, not only did Bernie not get it, but then Trump won. And for me, this was like, I remember like this, well, one, the obsession, the obsessive checking, like especially when Bernie was in the running. And it was like during the whole yeah, the whole lead up to it, and like information would come in overnight. It'd be like 8:39, 10 o'clock at night, and I'd just be at my computer refreshing. And this is like months before
Mhm.
like like primary stuff. This is like so it was so much buildup and so much anticipation and stress. And I think two things really, really came out of that for me personally. One was my interest in over-identifying either with a certain politician or with a political party, or and then noticing how I mean, I didn't really, I think, have the language at all for it at the time, but just how, right, how somatic experience comes into play with over-identifying, not with, I mean, all these different identities, not only just of, the way that we are, but also the groups that we join in. And that was really interesting to me. And I think it also really turned a question in me that was like, where is my agency in this? Because I felt like I didn't have any in some
Mhm.
senses.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, I think that's actually what brought me to start working with sound healing in general was I just felt like there was nothing. I had tried to do all these things and I voted, tried to get everyone to do whatever, and it hadn't come out of it. So then I was like, well, what can I do? Like, what is in my agency now that I can do? And I was like, oh, I can offer music to people that can maybe help them find a source of co-regulation or down-regulation, and that's really what started it for me.
Yeah, I'm loving that something that parallels between you and Marika is this kind of like urgency to get people to do this thing that would help you feel safe. And when we think about in terms of voting for somebody, and what we're really talking about is that we're just talking about what makes us feel safe. And like I was saying, one person that represents a certain very large population in the country, like let's say people who vote for Trump. There's people in that category that don't even like Trump. They just want a Republican. There's people who adore Trump. Either way, they feel really safe with Republican policies. And then we have people that would vote for Kamala. A lot that I've talked to don't even like Kamala. They like a Democrat, or they like the idea that it's a woman, or like the idea that it's a black woman. Others love Kamala. So it's these different ways, but either way, whether it's an identity thing or a policy thing or a party thing, it creates some sense of safety in them to imagine this person presiding. And I guess I wonder if the conversations were about that. If we start by centering, oh, this is actually for me to feel soothed, and then go from there how we might hold these election years differently, because I find it fascinating, and I don't know if shocking is the right word, but surprising that every 4 years we haven't gotten used to it, that it's like it's almost like it's new. Like we really start believing, like Marika was saying, we go into the binaries and we listen to the different news commentators and social media binaries about the other side and the other person. And the two, I look at, Kamala and Trump, and I see people both talking poorly about each other, maybe one more than the other in certain ways, but still kind of talking negative about the other party and how they're going to destroy things. And I think it's just fascinating, again, that we're all neighbors in this big country, and we have this kind of practice or habit of constantly disconnecting from our neighbor by putting them down and dehumanizing them in certain ways. And I just wonder how that trickles into our bodies around, well, someone might win who completely wants a different country than I want. How do I sit with that? And before we even go into that, I want to go into the reality, right? Because there's the expected threat of, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And then there's the reality of, oh, the thing happened. And so that makes me different from all three of you is I wasn't worried about Trump or Biden. I was so not caring at that point. Now, see me a couple years before, a decade before, different story. But I was not, I had gone through a lot of work of working with Republicans already directly, becoming friends with Republicans, even really wanting some people who were Republican to be in a high level because I loved their policies so much. And so I kind of went this weird thing of being like uber liberal, like watching Hillary Clinton cry in McDonald's. Everyone remember that moment in 2006? And I was like in my apartment, like crying with her watching it. And so I was so like hooked on this one particular narrative. And then the next 2 years, and I have a podcast coming out about it. It might have come out already by the time this happens, but the next 2 years, I was like shocked that everything I actually believed in, this libertarian candidate who had to run as a Republican believed in too. And it like blew my mind because it was so opposite of what the Democratic candidate that year was running on. Like more war, where this person was anti-war and no work for the indigenous people. This person worked with indigenous people for 30 years. I'm like, this is strange. Republicans aren't supposed to like these things. So it kind of, my mind had been opened so much that the binary was gone. So the 2016 election, I was actually concerned for the people around me. Like I noticed that I had a bit of codependence, especially with my best friend. Y'all know who I'm talking about. He was revved up. And I remember thinking like, okay, I'm voting for Biden just so you can sleep at night. But I didn't I didn't want either. I had no interest in either. So I'm just kind of saying out loud, what I want to go into for the listeners is what was the difference between what you thought was going to happen and what actually happened? And I know this is the hardest part, but keep it about you. Like, what happened to you? What did you think was going to happen? What was the reality? And Camille, if you want to start us with that, especially because it was a very stressful one for you.
I think for me, the 2016 election, quite frankly, wasn't even about policy that I thought was going to happen. But I had in my mind that if we elect an individual who so flippantly uses racist and sexist commentary, that it will then give a thumbs up to any police officer who wants to racially profile an individual, or there will be no more checks and balances. There will be no more, at least even concern about racial profiling, unjust incarceration, things of that nature. That was the crux of it. Because again, going back to why I felt guilty for bringing my first child into this world was that inevitably they were going to have to encounter racial profiling, assault, and this particular president represented for me a thumbs up on that happening.
And then what was the reality? Like what did you experience in yourself?
Well, the reality is like, yeah, but it's not that it got worse. It just continued to happen. That is to say, I came to a noticing that, yeah, racial profiling continued. And yeah, were there some individuals who felt approval to do so because of Trump? Maybe. But for me, what I found is that it continued not because of Trump, but because of the biases we all have in general and our reluctance and inability to be with those biases. And so they continue to perpetuate. With or without Trump, it is my humble opinion that that would have continued to happen.
So that's a big shift, because what's it like for you to remove those two things of like Trump's going to cause this and then realizing, oh, this isn't connected to him? Like how did you get to that? That's a big leap.
No, no, exactly how, like the steps. But I distinctly remember after it was over, after the election was over, after Trump was announced winner, I don't know, it feels like a little bit of the haze opened. And I was just like, again, never again. I'm not doing that. And yeah, I mean, I guess even the lived experience of the 4 years, like I said, racial profiling continued to happen. But at least in my experience, my observation, it didn't feel like it necessarily increased because of him or his policies. And it, yeah, I'll leave it there if that makes sense.
No, that's perfect. That's an exact example. Even when you said on the steps, right there is one of the steps. It's like, what was I fearing would happen? How did I hold that in my body? And then what actually happened and how did I hold that in my body? And it's the noticing of the expected threat compared to the actual threat. And in this case, I'm using threat as the person got elected we didn't want to. I'm using that as an example. So you can see like the expectation is they'll get elected and all this is going to happen. And then the thing that you were afraid happened, and your life didn't get that turned over because of it.
Oh, and I think another thing, something that may have helped with that was, like I shared, I had the realization that what I was experiencing was guilt. And that realization also came around the time of the election results coming in. So I anticipated being a mother that I might feel angrier or even more like on guard, hyper vigilant about racial profiling, because now I'm in mama bear mode, but I had not been prepared or even anticipated that I would experience guilt. And so with the realization that it was guilt, just being able to name that, there was I felt it in my body, like we didn't figure it out, we haven't solved the problem, but to name that it was guilt, there was an opening. And in the realization that it was guilt about my children being born into a world where racism exists and persists with or without Trump was what I came to be with.
That's powerful because it's like what Evan was saying about agency. there's something about identifying, oh, what's inside of me that's creating the stress that I think is external. That's actually super empowering and brings your agency back because you can relate now to the part of you that had guilt instead of making about the world needing to be a certain way so you can feel safe. You're like, oh, it's this part in me that's clutching this. What if I relate to that part and play with that part? Which is interesting because I remember distinctly, 2021 was the course you were in, right? That was the year you took the course. I remember you shared something in that course as a student before we knew you, about this exact thing. You really briefly, but I remember you just said, I'm using these practices and I'm realizing I can actually be safe even if something horrible happens to my son with a police officer. And you triggered a ton of people in the in the group.
It was just the first of many.
It was your initiation trigger. But I remember Marika and I being like, who's she? And then I was so grateful you reached out. But it was interesting to hear that because I think when you can go to that part of yourself and be like, wait, can I be okay with this thing that scares me? And then when you are, you really navigate these things from a whole different body. You're not looking in a constricted way to change it. You have your preference, and then you flow with where it goes because you have that safety in yourself. You're not reliant on the external system. So that's interesting. Marika, same question for you. In your life, what was one thing you were expecting that was creating a lot of pain or fear or anger, and then it didn't happen and you settled in the reality of, oh, I'm okay right now, looking back or in the moment?
I don't, I'm trying to think of a time where I felt, because I didn't really think in terms of safety at that point, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
So I don't think I got to that point. It was more of looking around and seeing reality. Like, I'm still gonna live in this apartment. I'm still living with my husband. I still have a job. Like, my son is okay. Like, I was just sort of looking where am I okay?
Hmm.
Um, and that was something I hadn't been orienting to for 4 years. I've been
Hmm.
freaking out for 4 years. Or, leading up to the year leading up to the election felt like it was 10 years long. And so really when the results came in, it wasn't even like it wasn't even disappointment. It was more like um I have shit to do. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like, okay, I didn't get what I wanted, and now I need to like actually start working in my community and just doing more stuff that affects me and my family,
Hmm.
because this is somebody who actually lives very far away, and I'm not quite sure, what kind of policies they're going to have or whatever, but we're just going to
Hmm.
see, just roll it out. I felt like I was more present even
Hmm.
where I hadn't been because I'd been focusing on the future so much for so long.
Yeah.
It was sort of this opportunity, and you have to say it was one other person who really helped me turn the corner, because she went so far off into just, we're all gonna die, everyone's gonna die, we're all gonna die, like, and like everything's like all your rights are gonna be taken away, and you're
Hmm.
never gonna be able to leave your front door, and you're never gonna be, and I didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
Like I saw how I was gonna get there. I was definitely getting there. And I really didn't want to do that. And so in the face of her sort of fire hosing at me all of these fears, it was like, let's just see how it goes, and that was when I decided to get off of Facebook, because I realized how much it was ruining my life, you know. And
Hmm.
that was sort of for me the break, because I thought, am I going to do this every day and go on Facebook, and my job is going to be like, guess what this asshole said today? Like, that is not my job. You know what I mean? Oh my God, you guys, can you believe he said something so dumb? Yeah, I can. Like, this is not my job to like tell people this. You know what I mean?
That's right. That's
And
right.
then, and I
That's right.
saw how so many other my friends started doing this, and I'm like, we're ramping up to do another 4 years of like focusing on this for somebody who I was not a big fan of. Like, why is this person on my mind 24/7?
Hey, my friends. I created a space that is affordable, accessible, and anyone is allowed to join anytime, and it's called the Library Membership. The Library Membership is an online private platform that hosts dozens of my webinars, my somatic practices, private mini lectures, and movement practices. There's also a monthly sound healing, and you'll be invited to a weekly Tuesday live mini practice with me and other participants. You'll also be invited to be a live audience member in our monthly HLN team podcast recordings, where you'll take place in the Q&A that happens off air after the episode is filmed. For more information on this membership, click on the link below or go to holisticlifenavigation.com and click on membership and then library. You can join right now and you can cancel or pause your subscription at any time. I look forward to seeing you in there. That's been my thing.
Yeah, and
That's
so
exactly
I
my
didn't want
thing.
that anymore. I just didn't want that anymore.
Well, see, I think that's the freeze that frame, because what always fascinated me, in particular with Trump, what fascinates me with Trump is a lot of people I know loved him as a celebrity, like loved his show, like what just thought like was fascinated with him as a person. You know, they didn't like love him with their heart, but they were fascinated by him. And I think this goes for anybody, but when there's that obsession of I'm so focused on every single thing this person's doing or saying, there's some underlying fascination with the person. You know, it's beyond your quote hatred for somebody. Because if you really don't like someone, you're not interested in them, you're not going to spend all your time staring at them and breaking down everything they're saying. And so I think it's interesting when you said I wasn't that interested to begin with. You know, I'm not going to continue this. Uh, I think that's an important point. And when you said about Facebook, I really got this great visual of, again, the spell of social media is you have people from all over the world that are attuning, in this case, to one thing that's really stressful. And it takes you out of the reality of like the hundreds of people you come by in a day where you live that are doing okay, or the 100 people you come by in a day that aren't doing okay that you can directly affect and respond to. And so it's literally removing you from your location just to co-dysregulate with people everywhere around the same narrative. And so I think you're spot on. It's as simple as, oh, well, in the expectation of threat, a lot of us were hypnotized by the stories and what we imagined that it happened, and the body was like, I don't have capacity to even be stressed about this anymore. Some bodies did, though. Some bodies kept going with it. They still are. But I loved how that friend of yours was this visual of, wow, she's kind of redistributing fear everywhere. And I guess the other part that interests me, and I know this part doesn't interest many people, but I'm always so fascinated by the collective relational rupture when I'm talking shit about somebody's candidate. Like, there's something sacred for me, not for everyone, again, about living in a country and that half of the people I pass unknowingly voted for somebody that I wouldn't want to vote for. Like, they're allowed to have that. They're allowed to have that win. They're allowed to feel safe. They're allowed to live their life. Like, that there's a reality of freedom there. I can really do what I want to do. And people get really, hung up on the idea, well, what if someone's freedom impinges on mine? Well, guess what? That's freedom. I know it's really uncomfortable to say, but that's what freedom is. This tree has the freedom to get struck by lightning and fall on my house. It's like there's a nature of freedom where there is impingement and there is chaos and there is these moments being pressed against. And then what's really cool is you get pressed against and you outcreate. And so I think whether we like that or not, no one here has to. It's something that really grounds me and kind of takes away that, again, that human supremacy idea of things should go my way all the time. 50% of the country should agree with what I agree with. Like, they don't. And I don't agree with what they agree with. And I think that's completely okay. So I'm just saying that out loud because for me, there's this relational element. I feel a responsibility personally around, am I contributing to a collective rupture and a collective dehumanization of other people because of what I say about policies in person? Or am I actually having a conversation that helps me create some kind of investment in the relationship, regardless of who they vote for? Because we're at a point now where so much division has been building, for a while, especially these last 10 years, where if someone voted for Trump, they are this, and if someone voted for Biden, they are this. And that's very dangerous because if you suddenly get canceled out of someone's life or job or out of their heart because who they voted for, uh, you're getting to the place where you're really against people having their own choice of what they believe in. And so I think it's important to kind of stretch that open so we can have a little more nuance around who are you behind the vote, not just this means who you are. And I find that interesting as we talk about this too, because I listened to this brilliant podcast where this guy was analyzing, this guy who's very very anti-Trump, was analyzing all of the things Trump said he was going to do in his first term that was really scaring people. He did none of them. And I think that's something, again, a lot of people aren't speaking about is, well, he speaks about a lot of things that scare people, but there's very little he actually did. And I would even say the same for Biden. The things Biden said that scared a lot of Republicans, he didn't do. So there's this kind of like pandering the candidates do to their base where they get really kind of egoic and empowered. And they're just telling them what they want to hear. And everyone's getting really riled up and excited. Then they actually get the job and they're so overwhelmed with everything the job entails that they don't get as much, accomplished as they wanted to, or that they even would, that they were running on. So I even think it's important with the candidates themselves to separate what are they saying from what are they actually doing. And that always settles me when I see someone coming that I might not be excited to actually vote for. Evan, I'm curious for you, and then we'll kind of open it up more. Uh, what was your expected threat? When you were like, I'm throwing all these bitches in a van, bitches for Bernie, throwing them in a van, and we're driving them to the polls, and they're gonna vote, and it didn't happen. What was your expected threat you thought was gonna happen? And then when it actually happened, where he dropped out and he wasn't gonna be your president, like when did it settle? Did it? Tell us about that.
Mm. Yeah, I think for me it was just kind of like I had said, just such a big shift. I think that especially kind of with the energy of what everyone else was feeling, the stories and the narrative that everyone else was sharing. Um, yeah, I think my fear was just this big rise in like fascism, and like the streets were going to be full of these like neo-Nazis and fascists, and that by Trump getting elected, that was going to give them the secret thumbs up or whatever, to let things, go crazy or whatever. But I think that the part of what you said, like I think the separation of all of these associations and identities that were coming up for me. So like in my mind, originally it was like, if you vote for Trump, you are fascist and
Yeah.
you are racist and you are sexist. And like all of that was the story that I was retelling, I think, to myself. And then being able to kind of separate that, I think, which is I think a matter of time, watching and seeing that, it's actually not everyone. And I think another really interesting thing that I noticed was this other idea dissolved that is almost like people who, if a president gets elected who I agree with, I noticed this weird thing where everyone I disagree with who didn't get the president they wanted almost kind of disappears in my mind.
Hmm.
It was this weird experience of like, oh, well, we don't have to worry about them right now because they're not in
Yeah.
power.
Yeah.
But, and especially with kind of the more things that I was concerned about was like this rising and like fighting in the streets or whatever. That regardless of who's president, the people who feel that way don't actually disappear.
Mhm.
So I think it really shifted my view of, one, really noticing that it's not everyone. And then I think two, maybe kind of bringing more curiosity into like, how do people actually feel? Who actually are my neighbors? What does it mean that they like a certain candidate? And then also, I think a lot more agency of like, well, what can I do? What is it that I can do in my direct community that can support people?
Yeah, I'm feeling a lot when you say that. I love all that so much. I think in particular the part of in your mind they all go away. That's really important to me. That speaks to what I was saying about that collective dehumanization and collective rupture of, okay, our party's in, forget all those people. And I think you're answering my surprise as to why am I so shocked every when this 4 year thing happens, and that's why, because there's such a delusion that it's always going to go my way, and I really call it a delusion, like a kind way, because I've been part of that delusion too, where you really think, okay, we're in, we got it, it's my country the way I want it to be, and you forget there's tens of millions of people that are not enjoying that experience. And then they go out and vote as they should. That's what the country's about. And then someone else comes in who I don't agree with. Where'd they come from? How could anyone do this? So it's like it speaks to how out of touch we are with people who are different from us. That's what it really comes down to for me. And capacity for difference, Camille. I'm so fascinated by capacity for difference, not often being through a political lens. Like we want to have it through the lens of like sexuality and race and ideas, perhaps. But when it comes to politics, like, nope, nope, stay in your lane. only be friends with Democrats, only be friends with liberals, progressives, Republicans, whatever it is. And I just wonder, why are we so afraid? Need help answering this question. What is our fear of being friends with people who, like, why can't I not have pro-life friends if I'm pro-choice? Like, what's the, because I do. So I don't know, why are they a threat to the world? And yes, Marika's right. I am a man. We'll call me that for now. I'm saying it. I'm saying it. I'm a man, baby. And I'm a man, baby.
Oh
And
my
so,
God.
so I'm a man. And so what I'm trying to figure out is, yes, I'm not personally affected by any, Roe versus Wade ruling or abortion rulings, but I know plenty of liberal women who are also like, they ride the wave. They're like, okay, we're going to figure this out if it happens. We're going to find a way to work with this because our ancestors did. People did 40, 50 years ago. Like there's ways to work with this, and they're still friends with people who are pro-life. So I'm just saying out loud, Daryl Davis, come on. Like, how do we befriend, or why don't we befriend people who are politically different? Who wants to dive in with this one?
That's not what we're taught. We are taught. No, we are. What are the two things we're not supposed to talk about in conversation? Politics and
Politics and
religion.
religion.
You can talk about anything, but you can't talk about politics and religion. And for me, in my practice, I say that's because we've only we haven't been taught how to converse about politics, how to converse about religion. We only know how to debate about those things. So if I'm in relationship with someone who I'm pro-choice, they're pro-life, we can talk about anything and everything except that. But why? Like you said, because the only reason that we would ever engage on that, supposedly, is because we're trying to persuade the other that I'm right. And so fundamentally for me in my practice, what is our capacity to release the need to be right, or release the need to come to consensus or agreement? People will ask me, well, at what point do you just agree to disagree? Personally, from the very fucking beginning. We can absolutely, and that's why I personally choose to integrate politics and religion into my diversity, equity, and inclusion practice, because we absolutely can have a conversation about politics and religion. We just have to learn the difference between having a conversation and having a debate.
Yeah, as you're saying, also, I just love the joy you bring to Evan whenever you say something, because I see him like smile and get all happy and a little all I see you, autism. I see you, autism. Autism in me sees the autism in you. But I think that this is great because I'm going back to 2008, 2007. And that's when I discovered this like candidate that was running, and he had to run on a Republican ticket, because you have to be a Republican or Democrat to even get on a ticket in America, still, unfortunately. And I was fascinated by his policies. They were so similar to what I believed in, outside of religion and abortion. Those are like the two things I didn't connect with. But my friend and I were canvassing to like learn about the people in our area. And so we met a lot of Republicans. And with that open-mindedness of like, tell me what your thing is. Like, why are you so against, a woman having an abortion? Explain this to me, because it's not you doing it. I get that you don't want it. Like, why are you doing it when other people have it? And they broke it down to me in such a way I wouldn't have been able to fathom before, where they were like, we don't believe in it. We actually aren't against someone doing it. We're against our tax dollars funding it. And when they said that, it was like this nuance that made so much sense to me, where I could understand, because I'm against my tax dollars funding war. Like everyone thinks that I'm so neutral about everything. If I had the option, I would never let my taxes fund Israel's war, the Iraqi war. Like, I'm not for funding war at all. I just had a meeting actually with an accountant that's starting to invest money for me. And I said, don't invest in any wars or any pharmaceuticals. He called me back. He's like, there's nothing to invest in, Luis. And I said, then don't invest my money, bitch. And I couldn't believe that this man works for tons of people who are left wing, who never asked that question. I was like shocked. So I'm just saying, when I heard that, I connected with them, because even though I'm not from that thinking, I'm like, I get it. I get why you don't want this to be a federal mandate. So when Roe versus Wade gets overturned, totally understand the rupture that causes and why. I also understand why some people want it overturned. They don't want their taxes going toward it. And so this is where the conversations are so important to me. Like, when you can create a fluidity with your neighbors who oppose your beliefs, there's a difference between someone opposing your belief and opposing you existing. Very different. And we conflate the two. And the latter is very rare, actually. The former is much less rare. But if someone opposes my beliefs, there's so much I can learn about why that then the charge of these people in the world, they don't become the boogeyman anymore. I'm like, oh, I get why they're doing that. How can we work toward getting everyone's needs met? And there is ways, there are ways, but I think if you're in that binary thinking, it's either my way or it's your way, and then someone has to take from each other. But I think there's a much more complicated yet possible, compromise. I just wonder where that goes. Anyone wants to add anything?
Where I went with that also is there's also a reality piece, which is before and after laws were enacted, people were getting abortions.
That's right.
And so like if like half the country couldn't get that done, like you would know which states you could go to, or you can crowdfund. There's all kinds of things you can do now that you could get with the pill in the mail, like whatever.
That's right.
And so it's like when people are like, it's over, it's over. I'm like, in this one regard,
Yes.
it's never been over.
Yes. Yes. I think that's again, excellent reorienting toward agency. Because when you repeat the idea that it's all done, we're fucked, you're literally telling people unconsciously, you have no power, I have no power, this all sucks. But when you can reorient, okay, well, what else is possible? What else is true? This whole landscape of options come to you. And I had that exact experience. A lot of my friends are gay men, and I had this conversation with them. That was the biggest issue for them when Trump was first running. They were so afraid that he was going to end gay marriage, which I truly don't know why they were afraid of that, because I mean I've seen lots of Trump's one of his best friends was a lawyer who's very gay. Like I don't know where this idea of him being homophobic is. I think he's inappropriate with his language, but I haven't seen like homophobic policy yet. That's not saying Republicans don't always have that, but I haven't seen him bring any kind of homophobia. So I'm still confused about that. If someone wants to send me otherwise, I'm very open to hearing. But we were talking about this, in these months leading up to the first election with him. And that was the fear of like everything we worked for, we're going to lose. I'm going to lose my marriage. I'm going to lose my ability to have my husband come to the hospital if I'm sick. And I remember hearing a group full of them say it, but the older gays were like, Luis, girl, I'm not afraid. Are you kidding me? We've been together since the 70s. We've been together since the cops could put us in jail for being together. We know what it's like to be happy and free without a system. And I was like so moved by that. And I thought, just like you said, before and after the policies, there's still been a sense of freedom. It's just not the way we're used to it. So I think when it changes the way we're used to it changing, it doesn't mean it's over. It means it takes on a new form. How are we going to flow with that new form and create something new?
Well, I also have a thing around the thing I keep thinking about too is that comes up the most is rights. It's like
Mhm.
women's rights and gay rights and every kind of rights. And the thing that I find most fascinating about it is someone gives it to you. You know what I
Yep.
mean?
Yep, I
Like,
do.
and I know that I think everybody should, I think I want everybody to feel free and to have the rights that other people have. And yes, like my friends who are like, I'm not gonna stop being gay.
That's right.
I'm not
That's
gonna
right.
stop being a woman. Like it's important to keep fighting for those things, but also the people who took it away, like somebody also gave that to you. So it's this thing where it's like, where am I in all of that? Like
Mm,
in my identities and my labels.
I love
Like
that.
how important are they really?
I
So
love that because you take me back to one of my first mentors who was a 54-year-old gay retired drag queen, and he would throw shade in marriage. He's like, I don't want to get married. That's for straight people. Like, and he, not like he wasn't like, being negative to his gay self. He was just like, we have something different. We have a union. He would always say this different. We have a union. They had rings. They legally, they had everything that a married couple would have. But because there was this concept of, well, if I'm not married, I'm less than, it became so scary for someone to imagine losing that. Now, I'm obviously for gay marriage. I'm not saying people shouldn't get married who are gay. I'm just saying it was really cool to be around this elder before it was even legal. This is before it was legalized, who was living his best life with his husband for like 40 years. So he was invincible to that. And I think that's the thing I'm fascinated by in this conversation that we're getting to here is yes, external policies will change, and some will even create a barrier to what you're used to or what you believe you need or should deserve. And there's this empowerment that runs so much deeper than someone giving you the right to exist. And I'm curious where you go with that, Camille or Evan.
I think something that was coming up for me too a bunch was when you're like asking what is it? The what's like the piece that why you're so shocked about the reaction that comes up. And I think that, at least where I go with it, is there's like power, and then there's like the overcoupling with power.
Mm.
And whereas like law in the government goes into effect, and there may be, I mean, there's real power behind that. But then when there's, I feel like a lot of times I've seen and been engaged in the past where I don't even think it begins as a conversation, it begins as a debate. And each person really feels, at least I used to, as if I represented, like I was so over-identified with the party that I was a part of, that I felt like it was like life or death. And it was almost as if I could convince this one singular person in front of me to agree with me, it would somehow change the landscape of the country. Because then it would prove, well, and then essentially what it comes down to is I have more power to assert my opinion onto this person. And then that means if this can be done, then everyone can do it. And then we'll all enforce whatever this is. And just noticing that overcoupling of like, it's one person in front of me. Like, what are they going to do?
Mm.
If like, I mean, sure, maybe if we both go out and vote opposite, it like cancels our vote or whatever that is. But still, it's like with just one person. I mean, it's just interesting how much charge and activation can come up when you're just with a singular other person.
I think that overcoupling is really powerful, and you use the word enforce. I think it's so powerful because if I go to what Camille says about a conversation and debate, I hear that in the term enforce, and it's like when I'm trying to enforce my belief on just even one other person in this case. To me, that shows me my low capacity for difference and my belief that the safety is outside of me. Whereas imagine if we took the energy we tried to like canvas and enforce and debate, and we use that to have conversations with like purposely have conversations with people completely opposite from us. Like I had to ask you, Evan, then we'll go to Camille. Like, what were there over uncouplings that happened for you last year when I took you to the convention? Because we went to the Brave Angels convention and we met like all those black Republicans. Like, was there, I'm curious, was there like an uncoupling, or were you already uncoupled before that with Republicans and what they stood for?
Um, I think I was already on my way, but I would say that was the final, the final uncoupling was just
The
seeing
maraschino cherry.
every, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that, and I just feel like one of the big uncouplings for me was, like I had said, it started off as this big fear of this rise of people who are fascist, and they're imposing what they want onto me. And then really realizing like, oh, by getting into these kinds of debates with people, that's the same, that's the part of me that is
Yes,
also being fascist. I'm trying to
that's
impose
right.
something on someone else without being curious about what it is, and being kind of dragged along by overcouplings that don't necessarily end where I think they do.
I hope everyone at home can really hear what he said, because that's the gold for me, just like the way Camille found the guilt. It's like, oh, wow, this thing I'm so afraid of happening in the world, I'm literally doing that with each person I'm in front of right now. Like, I'm just trying to impose and enforce this idea that I think is right. That's fascism, right? It's like you shut down difference, essentially. And so it's interesting how we can have fascist conversations without even noticing it in the name of trying to prevent fascism from spreading. That's fascinating. That's fascinating to me. Um, Camille, what were you gonna say?
What was I gonna say?
She's like, at that point, what am I gonna say?
To remember.
Or what do you want to say right now?
Yeah, what do I want to say? I don't know. It's I know it's a lot to be with. And one of the things that I am consciously trying to witness is that right now it is very easy for me to overcouple the actions of a few Republicans with all Republicans. So, for example, in the last couple of weeks, there have been a litany of different prejudicial sayings coming in, and whether it's about race or gender or ethnicity coming from some Republicans. So it'd be really easy for me to say all Republicans are sexist because they think if you don't have kids, you're a childless cat lady. Or it would be really easy for me to say like, all Republicans are xenophobic because they refuse to pronounce her name correctly and they make fun of her name. When in reality, when I sit with it, I can count that, yeah, it was like 5, 7 individuals. Now, granted, yeah, are they on TV? Are they on social media? Absolutely. And then I want to think about, seriously, numerically, how many Republicans are there? And so for me,
Hmm.
that's just a practice that I do. I'm not negating or ignoring the reality that that rhetoric is happening. And then I'm also noticing that for me, a lot of the charge comes from, if you're a Republican, you are saying this.
Beautiful. I think that's a great example for people listening. It's like a very like kind of practical example if they don't want to go too deep or it's too abstract to do the kind of more open-hearted or somatic approach. Just literally the facts. Like here's a handful of people I saw say this, and there's tens of millions of people that agree with these policies, but don't essentially say those things. You know, like again, the policy can be very different from the person. And again, my uncouplings have been coming from a Republican and Democrat family. And so sitting there watching my Puerto Rican dark-skinned grandfather watching TV as Trump's talking about immigration and him going, that's who we need, Sonny, like loving him. And I'm like, oh, this is fascinating. You know, so it kind of helped me understand like this narrative we have is just too basic. It's too basic. And that basic binary narrative of the other side is what prevents you from kind of crossing over and getting curious. And I know for me, when I've humanized people I disagree with, I find out like actually 80% we agree with. And we might have a different way of how we get there, but we actually agree on so many things. And that's why I always say I'm purple, because I'm like, there are so many things from the left I so agree with. There are so many things from the right I so agree with. And the only other thing I would say that's my bias is I think the right is funnier, and take it or leave it. When I watch people shading each other on TV, the right is much funnier than the left. I'm trying to find a good, if anyone knows, well, actually, Marika sent me a good one, but if anyone knows like some good leftist commentators or comedians that are funny, send them
Daily
my way.
Show,
Send
Daily
them.
Show.
Okay,
That's your
there, I'll take
go-to.
that. I'll
Yeah.
take that one. I'll take that one. But yeah, but so to me, it's really about fostering the complexity of the human experience, which is we're allowed to completely dislike each other's lifestyles, even, and we can have dinner together. Like that's profound. And speaking of privilege, that's an American privilege. In other countries, you don't get to do that. You don't get to talk about these things publicly about your own country or how you feel about somebody. You're made by law systemically to agree in very much of the majority of a lot of different countries. So I think it's amazing if we use that privilege of, whoa, we get to disagree still. We might not always have capacity for it, but legally we get to disagree still. We should really play with that while it's here because it's a very fresh thing that I think can foster a lot of regeneration. And I'm always likening it to farming. You know, when you have a monoculture of corn, the soil is ravaged in a decade. When you have a biodiverse, complex culture of many different plants, it's regenerating for hundreds of years. And I think the same is true for our relationships with each other. So on that note, I see you thinking, Camille, do you want to add one more thing? Then we're going to close.
Yeah, just one more, and it's completely different than what we've been talking about. But for
Go
me,
for
it's
it.
just something that I think it's part of the process, at least from what I observed. To the question you were raising earlier, like every 4 years, like why does this happen? Why are we so surprised? There's a part of us, and I'm going to use this term very loosely, that likes it. We like the urgency of it. We like the drama. We like the flair, and so there is some again loosely something fun about picking a side and getting irate and all riled up. Now, yes, do you burn out? Yeah, but for me it's very similar to like especially old school, Black Fridays where you're just out there trying to get a TV for $25 and you're willing to like elbow somebody in the face and you're like, why would you do that? Is the sale actually worth it? No, but it's also fun. That's something that comes up for me.
I love that. That's like so existential kinking it. Like if you listening, you don't know what that is. Carolyn Elliott wrote a book a while ago called Existential Kink, and it's all about these things we say stress us out. We actually find great pleasure in them somewhere. And I think you're spot on. There's an aliveness, right? There's like a stimulus, it's like drinking 4 cups of coffee to like
Yes.
attacking somebody on Facebook. So it's like everyone's like I always think of the Danny DeVito as the penguin and like the fake Batmobile when he's driving the car. Like that's us on social media. It's like having this blast trying to change everything. And it lights us up. It does.
Mhm.
So on this note, as we close, just consider what we're bringing, the many different ways to look at this, and consider what it's like to sit with people for how long has it been? Almost an hour. Just not talking about the doom, but talking about their reality. And what are you attuning to? Are you tuning to people and accounts and places that's only talking about the end of something as you know it? Or are you tuning to places that are getting creative and curious and saying, hey, we've actually gone through worse and we're okay now. How can we move? How can we learn from that? So thank you. And thank you, Marika, for showing up. That's the end of today's episode. Now let's take a moment to notice where we feel the episode in our bodies. Close your eyes. Take a breath. And let whatever wants to come up, come up. And remember, those sensations hold the wisdom that we're looking for. If you want to go deeper, visit holisticlifenavigation.com.